do have to give it a sort of an approach where you say like, yes, I will allow my employees, or generally like my partners or whoever, I will allow them to play around with the new technology, but in a more controlled and secured standard or way. I mean, you can at least say like, look, we will host this onto like our own tenant. And then like our employees can, go there, play around with it. It's in our environment. It's perceptionally safe. And at least the data doesn't really go into the internet. And I must say the same approach should of course apply to when we talk about browser security. Output from AI, bots, engines, LLMs, whatever, like it cannot be fully trusted. So this trust but verify approach will necessarily be needed constantly, every time. There was a very, very popular case here in Switzerland also about, I would say, like shared intelligence, where actually a CISO picked up the phone and just rang his CISO colleague in another company and said, look, we are experienced this and that. This is the pattern. Do you also see that on your end? And actually they also saw it. And from there, they jointly then reported to the National Cybersecurity Center and said like, hey, look, we are both banks. We're experiencing the same pattern of attack. There must be something going on targeting Swiss banks. What do you see on national intelligence level? Just like, shared intel. And they actually then figured out, yes, okay, there is currently a campaign from a threat actor somewhere on the Eastern European side of things, targeting Swiss banks. Yeah, I mean, like this whole thing started just because actually some CISO had the courage to pick up the phone and call another CISO and said like, look, hey, I want to be fully transparent. This is what we're currently going through. Do you see the same?
Hi, Michael. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. I'm super excited for our conversation.
Aleksandra, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I'd love to introduce you to our audience and what are we about to talk about. So Michael Ruppe is Group CISO at Adcubum, one of Switzerland's largest health insurance software providers. And Michael is probably one of the most multidisciplinary CISOs I've seen. Not only he has a background in law and business, but also chairs the customer advisory board at Bug Bounty in Switzerland, and also advises European Commission and even a cybersecurity lecturer. One interesting fact is also that Adcubum also recently went through an acquisition where Michael supported the whole M&A transition from private equity ownership to integration with Hallucinations, Switzerland's largest health insurer. So I'm super looking forward to learn that part of the process, what it taught you, and especially when it comes to keeping security reporting meaningful during such a large organizational change. But before we dive into all of this, I know that you've worked across quite a few industries, quite a few companies. What drew you to cybersecurity in the first place?
I got the opportunity to jump onto a position inside the team that I was in back then at the Swiss Post. We were mainly doing operations and such things, and like one position opened and I luckily slid into that one, and I was asked to support with our IT audits. So, I got like the first sort of glance into the security world, but more sitting on the other side of the table being audited. So, a lot of questions in the beginning that I also couldn't answer. And so I did have to gain a lot of knowledge about certain processes from a security standpoint. That was sort of very intriguing. And I said like, okay, hey, there's definitely more to it. So figuratively speaking, I did go down the rabbit hole there. And then I decided like, hey, this is definitely a fun topic. And I guess like what was one of the main points for me to like switching into a broader security role was then the point of saying like, hey, I mean, technical security, ID audits, IT security and all that is kind of fun, but there's definitely more to it. I mean, social aspects like awareness, human-centric security, like the governance side of things and so on. So I did go broad quite fast because I said like, hey, I do want to see like the entire entity of the security portfolio, whatever you want to call it, basically what's out there, and then find like one thing that I really like and then maybe do a deep dive there. And funnily enough, then in the end, it stayed in a CISO position practically because there you do get pretty much everything. So I guess that was the way into security for me.
Yeah, it's a very exciting journey, and CISO's roles are indeed cover so many aspects. Like you just have to be really the jack of all trades when it comes to understanding, different ways technology aware users approach security and not so much. And I noticed that you also have a very strong pattern when it comes to earning multiple certifications. Um, and I know that you even a federal examination expert for IT professionals in Switzerland. What sort of started this process and kept you going, getting so many certifications?
I guess for me, like the starting point was a bit the same situation, like I just described, was basically sitting there across the auditor, and this guy asking me, questions like, "Hey, how do you do this and that?" And I was like, "Okay, theoretically, I could of course, I could describe the process and everything, but I didn't really like get the theory behind it. I just knew like the practical side of things." So, if you then look into the industry and you say like, what are our considered gold standard certifications? You quite fast and easily bump into those things from ISACA, from IC Square, CISM, CISSP, all of those things. And so I said, like, okay, cool. I do know some of the practical aspects, but I also should, of course, know the theory behind it. And that was then like the way where I said, like, hey, I definitely need to like get my head down, like start reading those books, get those certifications under my belt. And of course, I did want to move out of that position where I was in, because in that team, just doing audits, this was kind of cool. But of course, I did want to go into that bigger picture CISO role. So during my transition from being an SAP security engineer / expert to then straight going into a CISO position, I sort of had to fill that gap and at least show recruiters or HR or whatever hiring managers that I am sort of fit for going into a CISO role, and that I can demonstrate that I at least know the theoretical side of things. Because yes, I could demonstrate audit knowledge, SAP knowledge, but that was more, like hands-on practical side of things. But I couldn't really demonstrate that I also know the theory and how things should ideally be done. And of course, certifications are a very, very good way and a great way, especially if you're younger like me. It's not typical that you find CISOs that get their first CISO position at the age of like 27, 28.
Yeah.
So that's definitely, that was like, okay, also a couple of years back now, but back then I was at that age. And of course, like, how do I demonstrate that I know the knowledge? So certificates are a very, very good way of getting a lot of knowledge fast. And also, like, if you do pass the examination and you get the certificate, a way to demonstrate to recruiters and hiring managers that you actually do know what you're talking about, at least on paper. So, but it does get you, like, at least it gets you an interview, and then in the end, it's about showing that you like actually know what you're doing, but you don't get sorted out right away. So that was definitely a good entry point for me. And I guess that's also why I then, acquired all of those certifications during my process there.
Yeah, this is actually excellent advice, because we do get asked a lot, how do I level up fast in this industry? And you're such a great example where at such a young age, you really use certifications to your advantage. And as you said, to get that step into the door and really connect with people. And as you said, really show your knowledge, at least in theory. Do you believe, is this a good time with the development of all technologies today, which is changing practically on a daily basis? Do you still advise this to be as a great strategy for someone that wants to become a CISO, to gain all the certifications?
It does definitely open some doors, especially with recruiters, hiring managers, HR departments, because they, of course, filter for certain criteria. And if they say, this is a certification that is demanded and you just don't bring it, most of them will just instantly rule you out. So it does give you like at least the cutting edge to, as I said, like at least get an interview slot. And then, of course, it's a little bit about self-marketing, I would say, like showing what you can do. And ideally, of course, convincing the other person across the table that you wouldn't be the perfect fit for this role. But if you never get the chance to actually sit there in this interview simply because you don't hold the certificate, it's definitely a good way to go. And I guess for everybody trying to move in that direction and who wants to, at least get the entry point, like the foot into the door, so to speak, like certificates are definitely a good way to at least check some boxes. And I know in some countries, maybe not necessarily in Switzerland, but in other countries, like holding those certifications can also directly impact, of course, salary ranges and stuff. So it's definitely also something that I would advise anybody to go for, definitely. However, like, don't go for everything. Like, I mean, I do hold over 30 certificates, and then, you get to the point where people ask, like, does this guy actually know something, or is he just like, basically just collecting papers? So, I mean, yes, it's kind of nice to have the certificates. You do get very comprehensive knowledges, but I must also say, stick with maybe one or two of those gold standard certifications for the beginning. Go for ISACA, CISM, CISA, something like that, or of course, like a CISSP, just to get like through that barrier and actually, like, as I said, get the foot into the door. So that would be like my advice on that.
Yeah, this is really great advice, and I hope people do take note, because there's always this debate how much of a theoretical knowledge is important at the start. And there is frequent case where people say the hands-on experience is so fundamental, but oftentimes the entry jobs require many, many years of experience. So yeah.
I mean, but also, I mean, this is an industry trend where we have seen it, like, really, unfortunately, strongly growing, that people do demand like 10, 15, 20 years of experience. But on the same time, like, you don't really get the chance to actually like get the foot into the door and actually build that certificate. And like also the knowledge that comes with it and the practical experience and all the kind of stuff that goes together. Like, it's the typical examples. I do want 20 years of experience at the age of 15, so haha. But, like, this cannot work. I mean, this is just, unfortunately, an industry trend. So,
yeah, that is very fair. So right now, as a CISO at Adcubum, tell me a little bit more about the company and what do you do in your role? Because CISO role in different companies can mean so many different things. So I'd love to know what you do and how your, daily routine looks like.
Okay, daily routine might be a bit tricky because every day can be full of challenges that you've never encountered before. But no, of course, like, I mean, we are one of, as you said in the beginning, we are one of the main software providers. We're developing an ERP solution for most of the big tier A health insurance companies in Switzerland. And of course, there's a lot of, supply chain risk involved with it, because if we would be compromised, then of course we would be the entry point through our software for an attacker into those health insurances. So there's a lot of, potential that we would be a lucrative target, theoretically. On the other side, I must also say, like, hey, in the end, yes, supply chain attacks are definitely real. I mean, that's a super big thing in the industry today. We do try, like, to secure the software. There's a lot of pen testing involved, a lot of reviews, multiple code checks, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not really the technical CISO guy, as in, like, I don't really review code by myself unless I really have to. If there's like some question that comes up where I need a decision in the end, okay, fine. But the CISO role, as you mentioned, can be very different in different industries. And, I even saw recently some job ads where they said, like, hey, we do want a hands-on CISO in the first line of defense. And I was like, hey, hold on, first line of defense, CISO doesn't really make sense. So I do try to live, at least in my organization, really that second line of defense CISO role. I'm more focused on, like, the whole governance part of things. But together with my team, we do split the responsibilities inside of the team quite evenly. Currently, there's like 6 people in the team. We got like 3 people focusing on all the, audits, governance, ISMS, ISO certification side of things, like the corporate security, what you want to call it. And like the other 3 are more focused on actual like product security, development security, DevSecOps life cycles, and like running all of that. And so, this is pretty much how we are set up internally there.
I think this is a great structure, and the way you explained it, I don't think it's typical for CISOs to be the first line of defense. Then I just imagine CISO being the only person there and trying to solve everything at the start.
No, you can't. I mean, I also saw some statistics, especially around the whole ISMS part, where they said, like, hey, if you do want to live your ISO ISMS part, like, actually live it, not just, like pretend on paper, like, hey, we wrote down the processes and this is now good, just because we have a piece of paper that states a process that's not really lived. We're not more secure necessarily. So I did see some statistics where it said you need to have, at least for the corporate side of things, 2.5 full-time employees, so to speak, like 2.5 FTE, theoretically, to actually maintain it, like seriously maintain it. but you would need to go actually to like 3 full-time employees, 3 FTEs, just to say, hey, I can also advance in the whole situation and bring in new values and, also actually change something, to be proactive, not just reactive. So
Yeah.
especially like when you then say like, hey, the CISO should be the one-man show. He should or could potentially do all. This is not realistic. Like every company that says like, hey, we just need one CISO because, everybody needs one these days. And then we just like sit him into the IT department and now make security and now life is wonderful and we're secure. I mean, this is false perception.
Yeah. And especially today with so many new threats coming out and, as you said, that CISO shouldn't be the first line of defense. If we translate the same analogy to, security layers, there's also multiple layers of security. So I have a question regarding that. So right now we know that so many employees spend so much time on web browsers. We have AI browsers coming out. We just had OpenAI browser that came out a few days ago. How do you approach browser security layer? Because there are multiple layers that come into the composition. We have cloud security, we have endpoint security, and we have browser security right now. So how do you think today it is approached at organizations that especially, handle so much of supply chain risks, whether no matter which industry you're in? I think we all live in very interconnected world. How do you think is it approached today?
I must say, like, in the end, it really strongly depends, like, on your company size, I would say. If you're highly regulated, yes or no, what industry you are in, because health and financial, medtech, fintech will, of course, be fully differently regulated than some startup somewhere. And I guess the approach, I would say this is really company specific, because in the end, if you're just, right from the start, you say like, I will disable all of it. I don't trust it. I will forbid it, so to speak. I mean, and you get exactly the same thing that happened back then when Facebook was actually released, or Meta, what it's called these days. I mean, what happened? All the CISOs, all the companies were like, no Facebook at work, no Meta at work, no, not at all. Like, forget it. So what happened? Like, the only thing that happened was the toilet breaks increased because people were sitting there in the toilet with their phones. And this was actually counterproductive. So, you do have to give it a sort of an approach where you say like, yes, I will allow my employees, or generally like my partners or whoever, I will allow them to play around with the new technology, but in a more controlled and secured standard or way. I mean, for example, you could, since we were talking a little bit about AI stuff and, not necessarily on the browser side of things, but in general, like LLMs and chatbots and whatever. I mean, you can at least say like, look, we will host this onto like our own tenant. And then like our employees can, go there, play around with it. It's in our environment. It's perceptionally safe. And at least the data doesn't really like, go into the internet. And I must say the same approach should, of course, apply to when we talk about browser security now. Did you do try to give it the best in terms of what you can do from a security standpoint in terms of your industry? On the other hand, like, don't just limit it all the way, because you will have people then saying like, hey, why do you limit innovation? And I mean, this is the nature of people. They will find ways around it. And in the end, I mean, this is also something that you need to account for as a CISO, because there will always be this one single employee that somehow manages to get into that setting where he can use the technology in a way that you didn't anticipate it to be used. So rather give them a little bit of slack, so to speak, cut them some slack, let them play around with it, but in a controlled way, I would say.
Yeah, this is a very healthy approach. And I love the analogy with Facebook because, as you said, this might be the new Facebook era, but in a whole different space. And, health industry holds so much of sensitive information. And as employees go about playing with so many exciting tools and potentially uploading some files to Gen AI tools, how do you see organizations approaching this risk today?
What I did see, I was actually in contact with one of them, like a CISO from another company in the last few days. What we are trying to do is we do give our employees, for example, the potential ability of getting AI-assisted business workflows and so on. But for that, we do have it in our own environment, aka in our own tenant. However, we do strongly limit the data that can potentially go in there. Saying, or meaning, all the critical stuff, like if we would put this into perspective now, since we talked about health data, they basically limit the access to that data like that strongly that even if you would want to use any AI tool on that, it wouldn't work. That just say like, look, there's so many safeguards in between, you cannot really, make the connection there. Of course, you could potentially start downloading very individual files, but you could never use it in bulk. And I mean, this is something where he said like, hey, it kind of goes in the whole topic around data loss prevention, data leakage prevention, and so on. And I guess this is the main topic under which this case should be handled as well. And I think it's a fairly good approach to just say, hey, yes, here are the tools, but we limit on our side what you can throw into those tools, because potentially these days, you could throw anything in there. And I guess from a data loss perspective, this is one of the best approaches out of the blue now that I heard in one of those conversations. But I mean, this is definitely going to be a topic for the next couple of years where every CISO needs to look into in more detail and more depths. But challenging times ahead.
It is very challenging, and at the same time, I'm sure that a lot of new exciting roles are going to be created as a result of this major transformation in the industry, whether it's using AI for good or for bad. What is your personal approach? Are you excited about the current developments right now? And are you looking to integrate more of the AI stuff around, or are you cautiously optimistic?
I would say a little bit of everything would be the perfect answer there. Because if you look at like the hype cycle, we are currently peaking and potentially like we will go even higher before I would say there could be a collapse. Because if you do look at hype cycles, eventually there's a collapse. And especially if you look at all these things that are now coming to the market, agentic AI, all of those things that should help you. The more and more you go into this direction, the more and more you start hearing about topics like hallucinations from AI, that they just make up content that actually isn't really there. I mean, there was a very prominent case also with, I think in the US, where some lawyer was practically searching cases, and in the end, those cases didn't really exist. The AI was just making it up, and he was appealing in court saying like, this is a primary example of how another judge in another, state actually decided on the same behavior. And those cases didn't exist. So, I mean, this is why I'm saying that, yes, it will be cool. It will definitely be cool, but also cautiously, need to be looked at cautiously because, output from AI bots, engines, LLMs, whatever, like it cannot be fully trusted. So this trust but verify approach will necessarily be needed constantly every time. And also then if you start using it in a business case, and you say like, I want to bring this into my environment, into my professional environment, where I potentially have inputs going into my software that's then delivered to the customer. And this in the end causes me, because it wasn't fully double checked, in the end, some sort of damage, no matter if it's like reputational damage, because there was some, let's say, sorry for the expression, there was some trash that nobody really noticed during a test case. And then the customer gets offended because he's like, hey, what do you write there in my software? Like this shouldn't be. Or potentially you could run into regulatory issues because suddenly, like some developer used too many AI tools to, verify his code or actually get the code developed for him. And it's no longer in a secure way. And in that sense, starts opening up vulnerabilities that are theoretically, regulated in a way that the regulator says this doesn't or shouldn't be in your software, whatever else you're using practically in the industry. So, there are a lot of potential use cases where this can go bad. And if it goes bad, it will go bad pretty bigly in that sense.
Yeah. And just to extrapolate it even further, I'm just thinking about scenarios where you have the AI agent helping you to schedule certain meetings, and then something gets sent to someone that shouldn't have received that thing. Yep. So it gets on a whole new level. So I guess also we have the problem of additional privileges that are being given to all of these new tools. So it would be very interesting to see how it all develops.
I do think if the hype cycle breaks eventually, because there's so many use cases right now, not all of them are good, not all of them are necessary even, but I do guess when the hype cycle actually breaks and we actually do this drop and then AI starts to become more evenly in that sense in use cases, I do think this is then when we actually get to the point where we can say, hey, now AI is really bringing business value and something good also to society, if you want to say it like that. But right now, I mean, yes, the bubble is nice, but let's see how long it lasts.
And we can finally let people use Facebook in the office, something along these lines.
Yeah, but I mean, when we look at it like that, as you said, I mean, there are potential very negative use cases. I mean, if you look into the whole topic around deep fakes these days or whatever, like people getting even addicted to ChatGPT, saying like, this is my best friend. He's always there. He always listens. Like no matter what I have, he's always there. And of course, like the LLM is always cheerful. Like whatever you give it, he will be like, great job, So
yeah, excellent question.
Yeah, so like people start getting addicted, unfortunately. And there are also use cases now where, of course, when the model changes and your entire chat was token based and the token actually gets eradicated, suddenly your best friend doesn't answer anymore in the way that you were used to it, because of course the token is different. And people are actually then starting to become depressed. They become angry. And, this could go into a very, let's say, unfortunately, also very then sad or tragic direction, depending on the extent to it. I mean, there's been use cases, the Sweden use case that we had, of course, we're going to elaborate this one further now. But I mean, there are potential dangers that are very, very real these days already.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how it's all going to develop and how as you said, the peak point, if it's already been reached or there's still, a few steps to go up on the top of the mountain. I'd love to learn more about your leadership style. I know that you've held multiple CISO roles previously, but how did your approach to your current role changed from where you used to be in the past, and how do you think it's going along and developing? I'm sure the influence of this technology does play a role, but how do you see it changed over time?
I must really say, when I was still in the Swiss Post and not yet in my first CISO mandate, I mean, I was really focusing on security. For me was pretty much like the black and white. Like you set the parameter to 1 and now security is active. You switch it back to 0, security is disabled. Because I was really running technical security back then. And of course, if you implement certain technology, whatever, to secure your system, harden it, all that kind of stuff, then of course you do think more in a black and white perspective. And then, of course, moving into CISO positions, where you also then have to sort of start thinking differently, because now you're not just, on this side that says, I will do the configuration and then no longer my business, quite literally speaking. Now, actually, as a CISO, you do have to start thinking about the implications, because now potentially if you decide, hey, let's change this from a 0 to a 1, you will have an effect on, 60,000 users potentially. And then this is actually quite big. I mean, this is not just like a tiny change that you do on the side. This is pretty big. And I guess the same thing when you ask for my leadership style there, is exactly the case with the Facebook example that we did. I must say, I'd rather give everybody like a little bit piece of mind, so to speak, that they can play around with the new tools, that they are in a state where security is not hindering them, it's not blocking them. But we do want to have the oversight of how tools and processes are being done, how systems are being hardened. So I'm not like the guy that just says like, no, everything is forbidden. Because yes, of course, then you potentially achieve very good security, but on the other side, nobody can really work anymore. Your business can't breathe. You make a lot of people upset. A lot of people, when they are upset, they will start complaining. So in the end, what will happen? You will also then receive a lot of negative, feedback and response and so on. So and people are less willing to actually sometimes jump through crazy initiatives that you might come up with, rather than now me running the approach of saying like, hey, I will cut everybody some slack. You can play around with the tools, AI tools, chatbots, whatever, but do it in a safe way. And security tries to support. Like we are there to really make sure that your business runs smooth, that your processes are, going well, but in a secure way. And also then being very proactive with communication. So we do inform our users about changes, like what's basically or to be expected from them, what will change for them and stuff like that. And also like very proactively answer questions. Just, because people are very much helpful or way more helpful if they actually understand why something is now needed. So giving them the understanding why this is a business need or a security need, for them, it's no longer a black box where they say, oh, this is just some crazy idea from the CISO again. Understand the bigger picture. And this does help. So I mean, of course, don't be too transparent with like, this costs amount X, Y, Z, and we have to do this because of that and that, but give them a more like, I would say, politically correct statement that does assure them why this is needed. And from there, you do start getting more and more support then, because if you then do come up with a crazy idea and say like, hey, it would be kind of cool to run a new awareness program for our developers, for secure coding on that and that platform and stuff. So, hey, everybody, it's like in half an hour of additional training or so. Like the feedback and the response is way more positive and people are more adaptive to those things than just running the security is the, always the sheriff saying no and playing the police and everything. So you do help users a lot more if you run a more open and welcoming approach to security rather than just blocking everything.
Yeah, the welcoming approach is super useful when it comes to communicating with the end user, because I believe no matter if you're technical or non-technical, you still want to understand the rationale behind a certain decision, which brings me to the point of how do you go about communicating with boards? Because it's so important to be able to express some of the slightly more complicated security metrics, but how do you go about communicating to the board and making sure that you really bridge that gap between the technical indicators and the business outcomes?
Yep. I mean, reporting to the board is always a bit of a different reporting style that you would use for, other executives. I mean, of course, if you report to your CIO, CTO, whatever, you can use more technical metrics. That's clear. But on your board, I mean, the people there are potentially, in most of the cases, not techies. And especially if you then go to your board, and I mean, for some CISOs, that's not even possible. You do want to make sure that whatever you report actually makes sense. So I rather show them an aggregated view. Because like in those 15 to 30 minutes ish that I have with the board, I do want to show them like where we are, what were like major, for example, cost savings that we achieved through security, because there you do need to go more into like the numbers aspect rather than like, hey, we ran a new awareness campaign and now, less people clicked on the link for the board. I mean, like what's that metric for the board? Like it doesn't really tell them anything, so there it's really an important factor to go about it from I would say like more aggregated view, also from the risks. The way that I would show or do show risks to the board is in a very aggregated view, because the board will look at a lot of different risks. I mean, they will have financial risk, sustainability risk, and so on, like different risks on the heat map. And if I then clutter the entire heat map with cybersecurity risks, because we've got like hundreds of them or so, fictiously speaking, we don't, luckily. Then, of course, they couldn't really comprehend the metrics. And they're like, hey, like, what do we do with this now? So also there we aggregate cyber risk in like one big bubble, so to speak, and say like, hey, this is the cyber risk. It's on the heat map. It's there. And just like indicate where it moved and, bring the board actually, I would say like something that's more tangible for them, but they can also put into the greater strategy. And I mean, this is maybe some advice that I would definitely give to all CISOs that will report to a board in the future or are already reporting to the board in the future. The thing is, if you actually like look at the board composition, some of those people are technical, cool, they will understand. Most of them are not. And then those board sessions don't just last your 30 minutes. They're not just like sitting there, coming there, waiting for you to like tell them about phishing rates and stuff. I mean, this is not the way the board meetings work. I mean, sometimes you have like one full day, maybe even 2 full days of board meetings. And then let me just like phrase it like this. I mean, if you got the slot on day 2 at 4 p.m, you got 30 minutes and then you go in blasting them with click rates on phishing, how cool awareness now works, all that kind of stuff, how many controls are implemented out of what sys controls you ever want to do. And like all of kind of stuff. Like, I mean, how much do you think really sticks afterwards? Like ask yourself that question. And then, I mean, this always helps to sort of, challenge yourself when creating the board reporting, because I do want that something sticks, that they remember like, hey, yes, security is on a good track. Because, sorry, like, let's be real. I mean, you can ask them 2 days later, do you remember the percentage of people that were clicking the link in the last phishing campaign? No, sorry, they will not. They will like not be able to tell you unless they go back into the slides. Forget it.
Yeah.
So you do have to like aggregate it in a way, way bigger picture, more high level, but still meaningful. And of course, bringing the meaningful aspect in is, I guess, the biggest challenge for everyone, because like what's meaningful in the end?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is something where I must say, this is something that you find out with your board. Actually talk to them. I also like, as you mentioned, the M&A period in the beginning. I also now had with the new board of directors that was now composed. I also had one-on-one sessions, really like one-on-one sessions with the board members saying like, look, this is where we are today. Those are our risks. This is how we got here. What's meaningful to you? Or like, what do you want to see that actually makes sense for you, that you can make well-educated decisions for the entire company?
That was that was going to be my next question. How did you go through this whole process, and how did you adjust to the whole new leadership style? Because I'm sure that you had to make certain changes. So let's say if somebody were to go through this process, what are some of the steps that you took to make sure that there is an alignment with the new board?
I mean, definitely what helps is providing the board past board reportings, like at least one or two, just to, give them an idea on like where we are with terms of security. And what I also do is like I do a monthly reporting that's a bit more technical, that provides a bit more details, facts and figures, numbers and stuff. That's usually just aimed at our like leadership team, executive team, and so on. But I also provided them with that and said, like, look, this is the last board reporting. Those are the more detailed views that you get from the LS leadership team, executive team reporting, just so you get like a bigger picture. Just to like, when you have time, look at them, like read through the materials. And then, of course, we will do one-on-one sessions. Because sometimes also, when there's a board meeting and you go into the board and they will ask you like, hey, where do we stand with security? I mean, yes, maybe they looked through the material previously or beforehand, before the meeting. But being non-technical, sometimes, I mean, this is the same thing. Sometimes, even if you're in a room full of experts, you don't necessarily want to make a statement or ask something that would make you look stupid necessarily. I mean, this is human nature. So there it really helps to establish then those one-on-one calls and say like, look, ask me anything. Like no matter how sophisticated the question is, no matter how stupid it might be, I'm here to help you and you're here to help me, basically. We will help each other by better understanding where we are and what we need from each other. Because then, this will create value for you and for me, knowing that I can report those things to you that actually help you to, like sharpen the strategy of the company there. Yeah. So this is basically the best approach that you can do in those situations.
Yeah, this is very nice and clear, structured approach, and I love how you broke it down into making sure that you still don't hurt anyone's ego as you go along this process. Because at the end of the day, no matter how technical topics can get, we are still talking to humans that have expertise in many different areas, and it's super important that everyone is aligned on the bigger picture. And I have to address the elephant in the room. You're wearing the bug bounty t-shirt, and I know that you're also chairman of the customer advisory board. So how did you take upon this responsibility, and what are some learnings that you think helped you out throughout your CISO journey?
Well, this t-shirt was actually a full random pick this morning from the wardrobe, I must admit. So there's no, secret marketing aspect in this conversation. No, of course not. Well, getting there was actually kind of interesting because we did want to launch a bug bounty program for quite a while. Since, we're mainly a software company, we said, hey, bug bounty programs will be very cool for us. But if you want to launch them internally, like what stops your developer from just saying, I will just, write the code that's potentially malicious. I will encode the bug myself. And then like 2 weeks later, I will report it like, hey, I found something and now please give me a reward, right?
Yeah.
Then, that would defeat the purpose. So of course we said like, hey, we do want to look into external bug bounty programs. And most of bug bounty providers out there, all of the services that they offer are mostly aimed at your external attack surface. Just like, your website, your portals, whatever you got out there. But then we said like, hey, this needs to go further. And funnily enough, then I was in contact with Sandro Naftzger. He is the CEO from Bug Bounty Switzerland. And I was like going to lunch with him once, or actually dinner, sorry. And I said like, hey, look, what could we potentially do to bring your product onto the next level, so to speak, where we can internalize it in a way that it becomes part of our SDLC. Like we say, like, even during the development lifecycle, we will constantly have those testing aspects, even in the development aspects. Yeah. So he said like, okay, cool. Let's try this out. Let's give it a shot. And sort of we started becoming like a pilot customer for that approach. And I mean, I'm also very well connected in Switzerland with different CISOs. I attend like the Swiss CISO summits. I go to all of those conferences. So we do know each other through the community.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, I was also in contact with other CISOs, and they shared their feedback and the way that they approach bug bounty programs, the way that they experienced it with different vendors. I mean, there are like tons of them out there. And then I was also telling Sandro, like, look, I mean, this is the feedback that I received, of course, without saying any names there. But I said, like, this is just like the industry feedback that I heard from some of the CISOs, from some of the biggest companies here in Switzerland, like having, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of employees.
Yeah.
Also like some of the biggest retailers and so on. Like you find a store pretty much in every single city, in every village here in Switzerland. And I mean, they basically said like, hey, this and that was like not fully there with any of the vendors that we tried. Like we would love to go away in a way with a bug bounty program that would provide us more value. And so, then we came up with the idea and said, okay, hey, I got all the connections. I got the access to the CISOs. I can, also bring that into the development of bug bounty, like that they can sharpen the product further. And with Adcubum, we basically pilot as a customer, so to speak, to test out all of those features, see where they create value, and then show those use cases or success stories with potentially the under already existing customers of Bug Bounty Switzerland. And then also like seeing, what their feedback is, like what are their pain points, what do they like to see, and so on. And so I guess like this is then how the whole thing started.
Wow. Such an incredible journey. And I love when there is so much collaboration in the CISO community, because it really bridges that gap between, okay, what is going on the external side versus what's going on the internal side. And it's just like this perfect blend of, hey, I know what's going on inside. And then some people know what's going on outside. So this is such a great example of how this community can be leveraged to build something so meaningful. So I'm sure that you do implement a lot of the practices at your CISO role today.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, especially the community aspect. I mean, there was a very, very popular case here in Switzerland also about, I would say, like shared intelligence, where actually a CISO picked up the phone and just rang his CISO colleague in another company and said, look, we are experienced this and that. This is the pattern. Do you also see that on your end? And actually, they also saw it. And from there, they jointly then reported to the National Cybersecurity Center and said, like, hey, look, we are both banks. We're experiencing the same pattern of attack. There must be something going on targeting Swiss banks. What do you see on national intelligence level? Just like, shared intel. And they actually then figured out, yes, okay, there is currently a campaign from a threat actor somewhere off the Eastern European side of things, targeting Swiss banks. And yeah, I mean, like, this whole thing started just because actually some CISO had the courage to pick up the phone and call another CISO and said like, look, hey, I want to be fully transparent. This is what we're currently going through. Do you see the same? And I guess this shared intelligence will become more and more needed, even in the community itself, not necessarily on CISO level, but I mean, the same applies to CIOs, CTOs, whatever. Like shared intelligence is so important. Of course, you cannot disclose like every single detail about maybe your company or your attack or the pattern, but at least try to find common. I would say, like, for example, if there's like an advanced threat actor and you find like common patterns that would pinpoint in his direction, then you can also jointly try to defend against it. And I mean, this will become more and more important.
Yeah, this is so essential. This is such a great advice. And especially when I would say even a few years ago, all of the CISO conversations were happening very much in the closed doors at special events. And it's amazing to see such great communities are being built. And for someone who aspires to become a CISO in such a complex world, what's the most important capability they should develop, in your opinion?
I mean, we did talk a little bit about the technical side of things before. We also mentioned, like some, how should I say, broader reporting techniques and capabilities, and seeing like the social side of things. And I guess a technique or a capability that somebody as a CISO or like a want to become CISO in the future person, we should definitely develop or further enhance our definitely social skills, knowing the person sitting across from you from the table, because this will be potentially your CEO, your CIO, CTO, whoever you report to, or even the board eventually. So, those social skills will play a major, major role. So you have to really lose the black and white, just ones and zero, technical security, like glasses or the hat, you have to take that hat off, or at least keep it on the side that you can switch hats, of course, when a technical answer is needed. But I guess this capability of switching within roles during your day, even potentially during a single meeting, is something that's really, really important. So this adaptability or adjustability in that sense is something that really, it needs to be learned. And of course, I also, bumped my head into some corners in the beginning. This is normal. But at least I would say getting there, you just have to get started. And also, of course, you don't start out in one of the biggest companies. Maybe even as a CISO or, somebody who's interested in becoming a CISO. There's so many startups or smaller companies, SMEs, that are looking for CISOs that actually say hey, we do want to give somebody the shot. And those are great entry points to also then start to develop your skills, because you will not instantly become a CISO of, a big, large corporation, a bank or whatever, without showing some, proven track record and history. And this then, of course, goes over the certificates that we talked about in the beginning. This then needs to have proof that you actually lived in this role successfully.
Be humble, keep on getting certifications, and know how to communicate with people. This is...
the communication aspect is most certainly one of the biggest things there, your social skills, I would say. Certificates, as I said, I focus on one or two gold standard ones. There's no point in getting 30 of them. And actually, for somebody who's looking into which certificates might make sense, there's this very cool roadmap out there, I think from Paul Jeremy. It's called the Cyber Certification Roadmap. And there you get so many certificates. I think 400 or 500 certificates are listed in each domain and field and sector. And also the level of career progression, if you're a beginner, intermediate, expert, senior, and so on. So you can really see what should be the next certificate I want to potentially aim for. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a good resource to then also sort of, structure your way that you don't get lost or go off track and suddenly go more tech and then, full different direction again, more managerial, to really create a good path, I would say.
Yeah, it's a very great tip. Very great tip. Michael, we have this little tradition on our podcast where typically our previous guest would ask questions to the next guest. Yep. And I think this particular question is very relevant to our whole conversation. It's just happened to be very relevant. But the question is, what's your best technique for getting consensus?
Okay, this is a tough one. In the end, I would say it also, of course, depends on which level you are trying to achieve the consensus. I must say, in the end, you do want to run an approach that makes everybody happy. Yes, you cannot always make everybody fully happy, but at least then try to go for a sort of meet in the middle approach. And in the end, when it comes to consensus on certain topics that we want to push forward and a meeting does not have a clear outcome, then, I don't want to force an outcome in that meeting, because in the end, that doesn't really make anybody happy. Then I must say, okay, guys, this is not going to, go in any successful direction now. Let's cancel this, go out, get a fresh hat, get a fresh, start on the topic, do gather some more data, and then come back together and actually try to, see what the other side actually wants, demands, because mostly it's tech versus business, or security versus the business side. How much can you give? How much are you willing to allow them, and so on. And I guess in the end, it's always the meet in the middle approach, so to speak. But sometimes it's just better to even step back from the topic if you cannot reach a consensus, and then come back 1 or 2 days later with a fresh mind and say okay, now let's look at this again with the new data, because there's no need in business to force something in that very moment. It's just not happening.
Yeah, I think it's very similar whether it's in the personal side of things or business side of things. It's all about being able to meet in the middle and being able to step back at the right moment. So this is very great, Samir. What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
I would say, since we had so many topics now already, I mean, what's kind of definitely an interesting one is, I would say, the whole topic around human-centric security. I would ask a question like, how do you think human-centric security would look like in the year 2030 with the current technology trends?
Very relevant question, and I'm super excited to find out what is our next guest about to answer, because it's all the time. Everyone gives very, very new approach the way they look at things. So I'm super excited.
Definitely.
Michael, I really enjoyed our conversation. I think we've covered so many great topics, from how you went to become CISO at such a young age, and what are some of the early steps and certifications that helped you at least get in the door, and eventually help to establish this community. And I think it's so beautiful where you are today, because you were able to connect with so many great CISOs. And as you said, when it comes to attackers, they really act as a community. And I think it's super essential for defenders to do exactly the same thing. And it's amazing to see what a great community Switzerland has in place. It was so great to learn the way you approach board meetings, broad discussions, user experience, because at the end of the day, I think the main skill that you kept on highlighting throughout this whole conversation is how important it is to have the right communication, no matter how technical you go. So at the end of the day, be technical, get the foot in the door, but know how to speak to people. So this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aleksandra, for having me. And I guess the last summary from you sums it up very perfectly.
Thank you.
Thank you.